Today we shall give more time for interaction, possibly. Today I will be talking more about understood in India. So to understand tourism, one of my favorite example is something which Professor Nandi said in his one of talks. He used narrating one incident which one rifle from northwest frontier province of Pakistan was apprehended and he was tried for some thing like anti-national activities and all that. Taxation of Pakistan has some issues. So most or many of them are actually tribals. He said something which actually captures the idea of pluralism. They said that I have been a Pakhtun for tribal for say past 4,000 years. I have been a Muslim for past 1400 years. And I have been a Pakistani for past. So this captures the idea of pluralism. That is, at the same point of time, an individual is subject to so many of other identities. Not necessarily one identity is exclusive of other identities. So for the purposes of understanding pluralism, the first thing which is required to be understood is this, that there is no requirement that one identity should be at the cost of exclusion of all other identities. So pluralistic societies actually recognize multiple identities. How they do that, that may be different. So coming back to India in this context. So unlike West, so in West pluralism is, as I was saying in the last class also, is quite a recent phenomenon. That has happened because of reverse migration. So that is also a very interesting thing how West controls all this kind of narrative. Essentially, West was initially talking about freedom of borders and all this kind of thing. And they started realizing that there can be possibility of reverse migration. And England was talking about, I was talking once to Professor Bill Potter. But if I'm not doing Bill Potter, I hope that it will go yes, Professor yes. Both of them are good scholars. So not that Bill Potter does this one. She was saying that she was in England at that point of time, suggesting that we could experience that how in public platform or in multilateral negotiations they're talking about opening of the borders. And at the same time, they were creating stringent citizenship laws that we can be allowed to the borders. So borders are also something which the pluralistic society, or as an idea of pluralism, we should be looking into, although that is a topic in itself. And borders are not borders which exist on the periphery of the country itself. Borders exist many ways. So border studies are also interesting areas to look into how things are denied and all this, and that is a very interesting area to do. For that matter, within countries, for example, you go for inner land. You go for say a passport or visa. That is signifying idea of borders. Okay, so borders exist many places within community also border sectors. So when we talk about pluralism and exclusiveness or inclusion, these are also areas which we should be looking at. So coming back to the issue which I was talking about, that in India, unlike Western countries, the society was multicultural right from the beginning. So for that matter, if we go for Syrian, Malabar Syrian Christians, but then so Christianity existed from first century itself. And that's why it's quite interesting that we'll talk about subsequently, that they may not be so loyal to the Christianity as understood otherwise. They are culturally rooted in India. Okay, so religion wise they may be Christian, but culturally they may be following many things which Hindus have been following. One problematic idea is caste. So caste discrimination is followed in all those religions. Also, you must have heard very recently last year, some significant archdiocese actually met and they said that untouchability should be clearly discouraged in churches and all this. So getting practice. If you've done all this, you'll find that they keep a kind of physical distance rules on the two sides of the people's say. Those on the first wave of conversion and all this kind of thing, those who were actually well off, so-called higher hierarchy of caste hierarchy in India, they converted to Christianity. Okay? So they themselves treat as better than all those. Subsequently, most of the people who are on the lower side of the caste hierarchy fully converted. And tell them this. Rarely find place from. So very recently, must have read in newspaper reporting where it was reported that one Dalit list has become kind of one of the obvious. So that becomes a news because of the fact that that is an outlier. That doesn't happen. Untouchability is practice. This is also reflective of effect. Even if you go out of religion, you don't go out of caste ideas and all this. Because of based on all these ideas only, we know as a matter of fact that in India, so far as obesity and civil tribe reservations are considered, that is irrespective of religion, but civil caste reservations are only confined to Hindus, and of course, for those purposes, the Hindu larger idea is included, that is Sikhs, Jains, and Buddhists are also included in that idea. So essentially, that confines gets that is also they have so much there. So it is more of Sikhs and Buddhists. But Christians and Muslims are excluded from civil caste. So at the time, the framework of the constitution was argued that they don't recognize caste hierarchy, and that's why it should. That to them, of course, that was not the only narrative. The Hindu nationalist people actually were arguing this on the basis of discouraging the propensity to people for the people to control. If they get reservation also, and this incentive is also. So there are so many people. So that is always something which is very important to understand when you understand law. Just because many people agree on certain issues, that doesn't mean they agree because of same reasons. That is also very important to understand. For example, everybody was in the Constituent Assembly against untouchability, but they were not because of the same reason. Some of them were because of larger human dignity and human values. That is, untouchability is bad. And so right, left, and center. This was one of the issues where there was a consensus that untouchability should be done. So far as Hindu right is considered, they were of the opinion that for the purposes of creating cohesion among Hindus, untouchability has to go. So all of them were agreeing for removal of untouchability, but the reasons were different. So that is also something very important to understand, that law in its making and its scopes also is plural in logic. Okay? Just because you went to come to a same kind of conclusion, that doesn't mean that the arguments are not plural. Arguments are always plural in this logic. Okay? That is something which is also very important to understand. So, given a kind of context, I think in society was essentially multicultural. So as a matter of fact, that in Constituent Assembly, jumping to the idea of Constituent Assembly, there are certain problems which we can go for a passing reference. That is, there was a project of Indian Constituent Assembly of creation of a unified society, and how to deal with this idea of unified society in the light of this idea of sensitive society being multicultural. Because for an European society, it was easy. At least at the time when they were talking about the constitution, there was this clear-cut idea. Their differences were not there. There was, as I said, that white Christian male idea of people, that who is a citizen, so you can just go and see. Or if you are in the United States of America, it is WASP, that is white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Okay? So, and if you are Italy, that will become Catholic. So the idea was quite monolithic. So you could have framed law keeping those people in mind. That is an ideal prototype. So when you frame laws, these are the people who are supposed to be taken into consideration, and these are the people whose rights, ideas, inclinations will have a reflection of the framing of the laws. That was not the case in India. Not only because of the fact that essentially on the basis of religious diversity, people were different. When if you go by, so one narrative is, of course, again, this is a complex narrative. So one narrative is this, that Jains, Buddhists, and all, they are also different. Significant number of the people actually hold that. And another narrative is this, that they are just a kind of reform movement within the Hindus. So most of the Hindu right people actually pursue this idea. That is essentially their to. And Constitution also reflects that. Because in Constitution, when talking about Hindus, you talk about Sikhs and all this kind of. So but as I said, that these are issues which are not settled either way. It has periodically led to so many of conflicts also. So if you'll actually see during the most troublesome period in Punjab, one of the things which was becoming center of all this problem was this also, that they were asserting, that the Sikhs were asserting, at least those who were actually fanning all this kind of movements, they were asserting this idea that Sikhs are not in, we are different. So these are again complex ideas. So one is the religious idea, that people have this idea that let us think that basically how to see the things, and that will decide upon that who are the people who are having significant. So that way India becomes a complex society based on religion also. That is, who is majority and minority will depend upon how you see that. Okay. So for that matter, you could see Hindus as one unified identity. Yeah, roughly last census will say that around 41% of the population. Sorry, around 79% of the population will have. Will go by a very monolithic identity. And then with respect to Muslims, you will say that 14.3% roughly of last census will say Muslim. So that is also important because of the fact that presently we are the third largest Muslim population, and by 2050 we are supposed to have the single largest Muslim population in the world. So even if they're less in comparison to Muslims, Hindus, they're significant in number as such. So far as Catholic population is considered, we have the second highest Catholic population. So if just because of the numbers, and we are hugely populated country, so even small percentage becomes huge, and that significant number of the people and interest they are supposed to be. Then the other idea is this, that within all this, so there is a cross cutting. So there is a kind of a vertical division of the identity on the basis of religion, and then we will also go into further cross-cutting in a kind of horizontal division on the basis of language, on the basis of religion, on the basis of caste, and all those kind of things. So that creates a multiplicity of identity. Okay, if you go for that kind of division, and that's why a kind of dominant narrative was not there at any point of time, because that's why I started with that idea of that narration of Professor Ashish. That kind of idea operates here also. At the same time, people can see themselves as speaking a particular language, following a particular culture, living in a particular geographical locality, and that will have a not much of binding impact on their identity. So you'll find so many people will have different ideas. Language is also one of the ideas which was there. So for that matter, we know it will go by last census, around 41% of the people speak Hindi. And there are at least 5 significant languages where more than 5% of the people speak those languages. And we know, as a matter of fact, 22 important languages and 121 actually, there are significant languages which are recognized in the census. Significant number of people who speak those languages. And we know that there are linguistic identities on the basis of which not many of states were created. And that is not new, because the fact that if you go back to Mauryan Empire itself, this idea of sub-regionalism was there right from that time. So there was a supranational structure in the form of, say, Mauryan Empire. Okay? And which was, as a matter of fact, factually was having larger geographical territory than India of present is having. Okay? At the same time, there were sub-national identities, okay, regional identities, and this were actually identified. They recognized, people were asserting regional identities, and the larger kind of continental identity were actually recognizing those kind of identities. So, in its origin, India has been that kind of country where sub-regional and local identities were very much recognized by the state. The other thing which is also important to understand that you will see. So let us go back to the Roman. Okay. So a kind of where you can consistently trace their history. So in a way, so far if you go for a continual existence of a modern legal system, Roman law is the world oldest, because most of the continental legal system follows Roman. That's why when you talk about Roman laws, you say, when you talk about continental law, you say that one of the unifying factor of continental law is that they owe their origin to Port Justinian. So if you go Port Justinian Day, so when the code was getting drafted, he said that, okay, it will take some time. Till the time it is not getting drafted, there are 5 scholars whose name we are recognizing, and in cases of doubt, we'll go with them. In cases of deadlock, there is one Balpian whose idea will have predominant effect. And they said that once that code is brought into the force, okay, they said that any tracing of law or talking about the law beyond this code is a punishable offense. They say that it's a very state-centric approach. Okay, that is top-down kind of idea. Where state is talking about law, state is deciding what law is, And as you see that they say that if you don't follow this, it is a punishable offense. Because the court comes into this. So unlike that in India, the state was not very much interested in all this. Most of the times laws were coming from bottom up kind of idea. So within community, within society, they have a particular ideas of law. And that leads to a lot much of variance. And the state already comes us and all this kind of thing. One of the things which you'll find, although again it is a complex thing, it is a great 10 lines which I that is you'll find that except for the idea that some idea of peace and all this kind of thing, the state was not much interested in what law is and how society will take care of their laws and their own affairs. So except for some very narrow area, the state was just keeping its hands off. Okay? So it was so for territories are also considered. State was not much interested, and that's why most of the territories were in private domain. You are supposed to pay taxes for the purpose of war efforts of the state. So far as animals were also considered, only those animals which were of use in state affairs, that is war efforts and all this, were of interest to the state. That is like horses or elephants, all other animals were also within private domain. So far the property is considered, so far as affairs of the law is considered, state was keeping hands on approach for most of significant part, and that's why Ram Guha rightly writes that when Forest Act came for the first time, Britishers became the biggest landlord of India. Okay? For the first time, forests were converted into state property. Okay? Prior to that, that was there. That's why Forest Act actually recognizes that idea. When it says that we are recognizing the right of the forest dwellers. So they're saying that this right has been there for long. We are not conferring this right. So this law clearly says that we are recognizing the right. They are not saying we are conferring the rights. So there's also recognition of those kind of ideas. So under those kind of situations, it's quite obvious that since law is getting made a bottom-up kind of approach, that way it may sound to be interesting, but that way it's origin. Hindu law is also similar to what happened in the case of Roman law, because Roman law also developed through scholarly efforts. Okay, so it was like scholars who were privately talking about laws and then subsequently became in state endeavor. So in India, by and large, it remained in scholarly effort, and that's why. And that's why when you talk about Manusmriti is not something which is actually creating law. It is a codification effort. Okay? It is a code. Okay, so unlike Act and code, all of you, I hope that must be understanding the difference between Act and code. Code is something which exists and compiled. Okay, so there is a distance of the law. So what Manu didn't create any law. Okay? Famously said that this cannot be the act of one person. One person cannot create that one. So that is an idea. Manu, in a way, was something like Ulpian or all those kind of scholars. That is, someone having a kind of great respect because of the fact that understands the kind of thing. So it would be wrong to assume that it's Manu's code which created untouchability and all this kind of thing. Manu was just recording the things that as society was operating at that point of time, and that way it was a very progressive kind of thing. I'm not progressive in the sense of liberal values as we understand it. Progressive in the sense of a very coherent codification. That how you take care of your property. So if you read one code and all this, you'll find that at least it is a modern correspondence. Although that is also problematic. Not many scholars say that that is not the right way to understand the ancient Indian laws, because then you are again looking at through the lens of modern understanding of how state. Okay, but you'll find that property rights, private affairs, theft and a certain kind of offenses. And that's why they actually was saying, Frederick Nixon famously said that we should learn from Manu Code. That is a very kind of nice, compartmentalized manner. They're talking about laws. Market, I'm not saying that what law Manu was talking about in today's context would be considered as a good law. I'm talking about a kind of structural idea. That is in a very structural manner. You're talking about what law has been in India and that kind of time. So that way, it is not that Manu was creating law. So it was again a society was having certain ideas about the law. So although that is again different kind of thing than whether it was revelation or not, there is a PL is divided. That is whether it is revelation or not. But even if you talk about in a kind of a wider sense, thinking it as a revelation in the sense of that Shrutis, that is Shrutis actually mean that you're saying that I'm not creating something, I'm arguing something. So from somewhere, I'm just narrating it. Okay, so you're not, so there's no claim of authorship in Hindu law. Okay, Whereas in many of other religions, even if you treat it as a religion, although not many people say it is not a religion, but even if you treat it with reason of this idea, since it is Shruti, so some accomplished person is able to connect with some extraordinary, extraterrestrial, supernatural powers, and that's why it is a religion. Under those circumstances, also there is no claim of authorship. So, market in case of Islam, even if Prophet Muhammad was illiterate person, he claims authorship. Okay, so he dictates that what I have heard and all this kind of things, but it's not noting it down. Okay, and from there only this comes this controversial idea which Salman Rushdie also wrote, although setting verses is one of his worst. Okay, Salman Rushdie is otherwise a very accomplished writer. So setting verses is worst, but he got so much of traction because of the fact that he said that while dictation he was seized with Satan at some point of time, and that's why those verses are satanic. Okay, that is the whole idea. So you see that authorship is being claimed, even if you're illiterate, even if you're not writing on your own, authorship is getting claimed. In India and ancient Hindu tradition, there is no claim of author. A lot more. So Manu is not author of anything. So same is the case of Narad Smriti and all this kind of thing. These are all accomplished, knowledgeable people who are trying to understand how society operates, and on the basis of their reputation, they became kind of more acceptable. That is, the society thought that what they're writing is of more relevance. It records the affairs of the society in a more coherent manner, in a more accurate manner. They would follow. So it was not that a stage was saying that follow Manu or follow Narad Smriti or so on and so forth, or Balaka and so on and so forth. So, as a matter of fact, and at the same time, subsequently also it continues still today. In case of Hinduism, when personal laws also, you find that there are various schools, and on the basis of where you are situated geographically, what cultural idea you have, you will follow certain schools. So it was kind of multicultural right from the beginning. Okay? So the majority of the population, which was Hindu population, has been multicultural. And I said that even if you are coming from Abrahamic religion idea and all this kind of thing, where there is an organized church and a top-down idea of religious laws are there, because of the effect of the society, people were not so much kind of unified in their ideas and the views. So you go and see that they have different ways in which they do the things. Okay? Interestingly, if you go to many of the northeastern parts and all this kind of thing, you'll find that Christ and Mother Mary and all this are also dressed in the Indian dresses. Okay? So like of goddesses and God and all this kind of thing. So they're having cultural influence. They're not projecting Christ as the Jew, although Jews also don't claim Christ as their own. But as a matter of fact, Christ was the Jew. Okay? Read Zidane talks about it in a way. So there are not many of jokes. Zidane talks about philosophy, not many of jokes also. Himself acknowledges that my jokes are vulgar and very vulgar. Not on this platform, I talk about the jokes. So you talk about that when Christ is a Jew, you lay the joke on it. Okay? Although Zidane is an external philosopher. So they don't claim. They don't claim that we are following the same cultural kind of wording and all this. So even with respect to Abrahamic religion and all this, it was so religion of the majority of the people, Hindu, is by its very nature multicultural, having plurality in ideas and all this kind of thing. Even in cases of Abrahamic religion, which is supposed to be a top-down kind of idea, where there is an organized church. And in those circumstances also, because of influence of the society, it's no longer such a top-down kind of thing. There's so much of variance. Okay, so you see that caste disabilities and all this, although that is not a nice thing, but it goes along with, even if you, so many people actually end up converting because of the fact that they're fed up with the caste hierarchy and all this kind of thing. And even if they leave the Hindu religion, they are not able to get out of this kind of evil. Okay, so such is the influence of the society over a religion, which is a kind of a top-down religion, where there is an organized church. That is the idea of any Abrahamic religion, that there is an organized church, which is a religion based on covenant. Okay, although they won't be able to deal with that, but there is a nice writer by a new theory has been developed by Steiner and where they are talking about covenant pluralism. Okay, covenant pluralism. So it comes from covenantism in pluralism. It comes from covenant. So they are arguing for that how religion can be used for the purposes of encouraging. So, but in that case, again, there can be limitation. That is, in India, there is no such kind of covenant. And that's why whether those ideas, which is becoming a very kind of, it is getting so much of traction in the Western world, but whether it will have that kind of idea or that kind of thing or not. So, although they are not new for that matter, there is one Egyptian scholar on Harvard, Abdullah Al-Nine. He actually talks about that. It's about Mike's views of Islam. He says that how religion itself can be used for reform purpose. So that is what covenantism also says, that how you can use and you can encourage tolerance and all this kind of thing by using religion itself. That is that's why it is called as covenantism in case of pluralism. This idea of pluralism is getting encouraged for covenant itself. That is, you're using Bible or maybe say Quran for the purpose of saying that by its very nature it encourages pluralism and all this thing. Because they argue that state way of encouraging tolerance and all this has failed. Have not been able to do that. Okay, so that can be said in case of India also. So that is what some of the people write in context of writing which happens in India. That is, it is not that your neighbors and your friends, your uncle and aunts becomes a lot overnight. Okay, so it means that there is something simmering under the surface, and just some occasion arises and it is scratched, and that comes out. Okay, so that's why the state effort to a certain extent has failed in India also, encouraging secularism and all this kind of intolerance. Because otherwise, if you have been able to create a tolerant society, then by its very nature there should not be so kind of rioting on the basis of religious identities or any other identity. It means that you have not been able to do that. Okay, although Nandi has a very nice idea of this. So Nandi actually says that it's not religious people who does that. So he talks about religion as being seen from two lenses. One is religion as a faith, and religion as an ideology. So religion as a faith is not problematic. What is problematic is religion as an ideology. Okay, so as is the case with any other ideology, that is, so they say that that is something which was interestingly being talked about by Mill, Locke, and all this kind of people, also Hobbes also. That is, they're saying that if we are claiming that it's blasphemy, that is, there is an offense against the God. It's not an offense against you. It is an offense against God. So why, as a human entity, you should interfere? Okay. So that is something which Gandhi also says, that those who believe in religion as a kind of faith, not as an ideology, you will also say that since God is all powerful, okay. So if somebody does any harm to God and all this, God is powerful enough to take care of that. It is a religion as an ideology which actually creates problem. Where you say that it is we will protect religion, it is we who will protect God. Okay, that is by its very nature illogical to do. Okay, because it is non-human affair, and how humans are supposed to interfere in non-human affairs. Okay, and Nandi gives example of 84 writing also to buttress his cause. That is, it is not the religion per se which is problematic. He says that you see 1984 writing. Who were the people who were leading riots? There were the people who were educated people. There were the people who were living in the kind of cosmopolitan society who think it has to be snatched away from religion. That is, these are the people who are not much religious in their outlook and all this kind of thing. So this would be the last people to actually encourage any writing on the basis of religious identity. So it means that secularism as a state project has not much of traction. So covenantism as a pluralism is also coming and talking about those kind of idea, that the better idea to create pluralism is covenantism. And there is not much of both. In case of environment, also lots of people are writing about this. That is, of course, writes about that. Ramchandra writes about this. That is, what is the difference between Japan and other ways? Because Japan also went through all this kind of industrialization processes, and it also polluted its territory in the same manner as Western Europe did. Why Japan was able to take care of its pollution in a better manner than say Western Europe? Because Western Europe is coming from this idea of Abrahamic idea. So there is a biblical verse which says that man has been created as a mirror image of God. So you have master giver all the thing which exists on that. So you have a right of exploitation. Whereas Confucian religion or Far East Asian religion and all this kind of thing, or even for that matter, some Asian religion and subcontinental religion, so they don't believe in this idea that is nature exists for the sake of exploitation. So many times religion has been able to achieve the goals in a more coherent manner, in a more effective manner than other so-called non-religious ideas are able to achieve, or what we call as secular ideas. So India has a project in 1946 onwards, so then in 1920s, in a manner, this idea got to the tracks. That is, religion should be secondary, and what should matter is individual rights. Okay? Same Western idea, which Edward Said calls as creation of a modern European man. That is completely detached from the society, has no mooring in the society and anchoring in the society. You can go anywhere and live like as if you belong to that society. So, and we know as a matter of fact that is difficult to achieve. So that was the idea of modern European man, where individual rights are much more important than group rights. Okay? Where what matters is individual. So in 1920s, this kind of thing started happening, and we started talking about all those kind of individual rights, where individuals are much more important than all others. And slowly, that got a lot more of traction. And you'll find that whether it was Supple Committee report, or even if you go back to any message report and all this kind of thing, this idea of individual becoming very important or center of every lawmaking was there. So this is a kind of idea which is just opposite to what multiculturalism and pluralism will talk about. Multiculturalism and pluralism will talk about individual is different. Individual is a kind of entity in a context, not devoid of the context. Whereas this kind of approach will say that individual is all everything for the purpose of making constitution, for the purpose of making law. What you should be talking about individual. The center of every decision should be individual, not groups. Okay, so this kind of thing was going on, and as a matter of fact, ultimately, as we see the Indian Constitution, although didn't go for a very strong approach of multiculturalism, a very weak form of multiculturalism. And can anybody tell me that why India followed the weak multiculturalism, there was a strong multiculturalism? What can come to your mind?
So if we look at the setup of the India, then giving giving room to every other cultural practice might not be very good. So, the cultural practice of the Hinduism may be antithetical to the idea of the maybe not in consonance with the discrimination policy which the India has. But there is one problematic aspect also. So if you look at Article 21, and if we look at the Santhara judgment, then it might happen that it is not consonance with the letter and spirit of the Article 21. But there is a practice which goes.
I'm afraid what is letter and spirit.
Sir,
I'm of the opinion that Supreme Court has never understood what Article 21.
the Article 21 is a bit Christian idea, which is not able to incorporate that death can also be celebrated, which I believe. After reading the Santharan, the Nikhil Soni judgment, which I read.
Yes, Article 21, that is an okay part, but since you introduced Article 21, not only with Santhara, Supreme Court has, or for that matter, everyone. Most of you, I have been told, are law students, so most of you have been trained to actually see that India follows the subject. But to read the judgments of Indian Supreme Court, I am afraid that subject is not being studied any of the Supreme Court. We talked about as a judgment substantive due process. What was Mental Gandhi? Which was fundamental justice, right of hearing, is procedural due process, not substantive. So that's why I said that 21 is a problematic thing to do this.
So I would like to we've just come out aftermath of partition. So we've had the idea that religion could be pitted against one another. So and most of our cultural ideas come, the origin of culture, I do understand that it can come from non-religious ideas also. But I think aftermath of partition was one reason why we moved towards multiculturalism.
So the idea is this, that as I said in the last session also, that again, I'm not going to that because there's no one idea. That's why I always said that I prefer the term law, state, and religion rather than secularism, because secularism is a good, has a particular lens. So you can actually see that it has something to do with which I said in the last session also, that Unlike the secularism or the relationship, secularism I can use in this context because of the fact I'm talking about West. So they have a particular idea. So secularism is that. Whenever we talk about secularism, you will have an understanding that there is a non-establishment clause and free clause. That has to be there. If these are the two non-negotiable kind of ideas or anchoring of secularism. The whole idea of secularism is based on this. Western idea of secularism is based on that. That is, it has to be a non-establishment clause and a free clause. Okay. Indian constitution didn't opt for that kind of idea, that is a relationship between law state. So this idea will say what? Non-establishment will say that wherever. So the classic idea of Locke, Mill, and all this, that religion and the state should not be fought together. Okay. So it is not a mandate against religion only, it is a mandate against state. That is, in church, state has no role. In religion, in public sphere, church has no role. Okay. So that is an idea. Again, a very simplistic explanation. So that is it. In case, so what you do doesn't matter what is problem in a particular society, religion, and all this kind of thing. Doesn't matter that there are certain things of the religion which are problematic. State has no business. Religion will reform itself. Okay? Because state has no matter. So in case of India, as a matter of fact, whenever right to believe. So Article 25 has very interestingly worded. So there are certain things about Article 25 which is universal in its operation, like public order, health, morality, and other provisions of this part. That is clearly in a secular state, you prime the secular rights over religious rights, and that is a marker of a secular state. That is, religion is secondary, and the secular rights are more important. Okay, but the other thing, as a proviso where it says that that the state has a right to indulge into reform activity. So this cannot be done if you go for a strong multicultural. This can be done only if you go for a weak multicultural. That is, you identify different identity, but you say that the state will interfere. So your multiculturalism is not a strong one. A strong multiculturalism will say that the state will not interfere. You have a right to manage your own affairs. So you'll say that there are state players, there are non-state players. In case of the non-state player, the state has no role to play except beyond law and order and all this kind of thing. So that is the Western idea. But in the case of India, right from the beginning, the mandate was to reform religion. The mandate was to remove caste disabilities. The mandate has been there to allow to open Hindu temples to all sections of that. And that has been an idea which has been there right during the freedom struggle. So that became part and parcel of your constitution jurisprudence. And that's why you have no other option but to go for weak multiculturalism. So that's why in the last class I said that Indian society is about weak multiculturalism and strong pluralism. That is multiple identity culture. So last class I was also talking about. So actually pluralism is a cultural multiculturalism. So you are talking about cultural pluralism and all this. So there you have a very strong pluralism. All those identities are getting recognized. Everyone, caste-based identity, religion-based identity, so on and so forth. It is not only based on protection of minority rights. So even if cases of we go for those kind of say a very liberal idea of democracy, where we say that democracy is not only about how you take care of the majority interest. Democracy is more about how you take care of minority interests, because majority can, by its very whole scheme of the things, can take care of everything. And on the basis of that only, we tend to agree on this, that to think that constitutions are the creature of a contract or a social contract will lead to a faulty country. Because then majority has all the right to intervene and withdraw from the country. You're not supposed to be. But that there lies the significance of basic structural law. And that's why the social contract theory will not explain most of the modern concepts, which we tend to do, and that is the wrong way to understand. Yes, we always say that constitution is what it is. Nothing can be more. It's anything but a social. Because social contract means that you have a right to obtain and you have a right to offer. So constitutionalism will never be established by constitution can be established by a social contract, but constitutionalism can never be established by a social contract. It is something much more. So even if we agree that a liberal idea of constitutionalism is protection of minority rights. So Indian constitution also it recognizes minorities' identities, okay? And that has become one of the center of controversy. That is something which cultural nationalists actually always argue against. That is, it unnecessarily gives not much of attraction to the minorities, which is wrong. Clearly wrong. It's something which has been Kami and all this clearly says this is what we call as majority suffering from minorities. Okay? Minority by its very nature are fearful of their rights. tentative about it. Because so if you are living in a society which is a Christian society, most of the public places will predominantly have churches. So a Christian will not feel alien in those kind of society. If you're a Hindu, you will feel alien. That where are my sites of worship? Or a Muslim will feel an alien. Where are my sites of worship? So by its very nature, majority should not be anything. Because society reflects the majority identity and all. But there are certain countries who do that, and that is illogical, but it has got some kind of traction. Our next door neighbor, in turmoil at this point of time, Sri Lanka was also suffering. So for this jihadists there were suffering from this same idea, that is majority suffering from minority syndrome. That is my identity is under threat. So you give minority protection because of this idea that by its very nature, society operates in a manner that minority identity would always be under challenge. And that's why unless until you protect their identity, because what they have. So if you see, go back to Europe, who are these people? So France, I was talking about earlier, they have left their shores. They have not left their shores voluntarily because of the fact that that is what has been in classic colonization of Europe. You go there, exploit them, destroy them, and you say that, okay, we are back. Okay? So you don't have any option but to go there and look for jobs and basic modes of survival. So they don't have any anchoring in the society. And that's why you require some kind of assurance that your identity is not under threat and that you give additional protection. So that is okay. But in case of Indian situation, it is not only with respect to minority you are giving protection. You are giving protection to majority groups. And the tribal protection in scheduled areas is a classic example of that. Market. Scheduled areas are not those areas where tribals are in minority. Scheduled areas are those areas where tribals are in majority. Okay, so you protect the identity of majority in a particular location. So that is a unique way to do the things. To the best of my understanding, most of the liberal democracy don't do that. Because this idea of majority minority explains that why you require minority protection. You don't require majority protection, but yes, in case of India, the vulnerability, non-exposure to modern ideas and all this, and that's why you tend to protect them. So this idea. So in case of India, multiculturalism is not only for the purposes of looking into identity from the sense of majority minority. Many times for majority also, you are saying that you have your identity will get protected, and you know that civil filings clearly talk about those kind of situations where tribal identities are protected. So that is there. So this is also something which is unique about Indian multiculturalism. It identifies majority identity and tries to protect majority identity so that the character of the majority identity is not changing in a particular locality. So that locality must appear like a tribal locality. Okay, so the tribal way to do the things and all this kind of thing. And we know this whole idea. So please mark it with respect to, although we have been talking about both scheduled caste and scheduled tribes under Indian constitution, but scheduled caste engagement was with respect to mainstream. That is, we remove untouchability, and you know, because of this, people were of opinion that all these protections are only temporal in nature. Over a period of time it would be. Because you assume that all this kind of protection will result into mainstream. They will become part and parcel of the mainstream. Although that is, we know as a matter of fact that that is anything but even far, even forget about me, or even my remotely it has not been achieved. Okay. There is no integration as such. Clearly so. In 2015, not 2015, there in 2011, there was a case coming from Tamil Nadu, where it was brought to the notice of Supreme Court that not many of public restaurants in Tamil Nadu, they maintain separate set of utensils. So if you are a high caste Hindu, you are supposed to get a different set of utensils. If you are not a high caste Hindu, you are supposed. So here it was all about mainstream. That is over a period of time, untouchability will be taken care of because all this protection, they will achieve what they're supposed to achieve, and that's why you know this quote. Although Metro was talking about this in the context of people's representation in assembly and parliament, but the logic remains. Ambedkar said that it is only for the time. So this idea of unification was there. With respect to scheduled tribe, that was not done. Mainstreaming. At some point of time, some of the courts actually had certain problems. But ultimately, for example, in case of Andaman, there was this order given by Calcutta High Court, which rightly so subsequently was undone. That is, they were trying to mainstream tribal groups. They realized that that is a problematic idea to engage with. They said that and that's why now you see that certain areas of Andaman are not supposed to be tourist sites because of all this. So you clearly see that with respect to civil caste, the constitutional project is to ensure that their discrimination is taken care of and they are no longer discriminated and they become part and parcel of the mainstream or say upper caste Hindus, as good as that. Okay. In case of tribals, that is not good. In case of tribal, you are saying that your identity we are going to. Okay. So we will not try to make you as if you become an undifferentiated member of larger society. You will remain a differentiated member of the larger society. Okay. So it is a multi-layered kind of idea of multiculturalism and pluralism, which Indian Constitution engages with. It is not that the individual rights were not getting argued. You will always see, and by its very nature, the majority is always comfortable with that Bradbury kind of idea. That is, you treat everyone as individual and subject to the same set of laws. Because most of the times democracy will take care of the majority. So you are not under the threat. So majority is always okay with this kind of idea. Although that is problematic, I will say that one of the things that is illogical, that is now also getting a lot of threats. That is population control. Kind of narrative has been created that certain religious groups are producing for the heck of it. I've never seen any individual, I don't know, to produce child for the heck of saying that I want to multiply myself. Yes, if you go back to the basic logic of gene, irrespective of religion, that is the logic of religion. That is, you want to maximize the chances of survival of humanity. Okay. So that is a kind of classical Darwinian idea. But so far as societal idea, I don't think anybody produces child for the heck of saying that my numbers will. So unless until that person is suffering from some kind of abnormal and abnormality as well. So again, as I said that I will, in case of uniform civil code and all this kind of thing, these are also the issues sometimes which crops. That is, certain sections are multiplying, they just take overnight forms over a period of time. Scientifically, there is no basis to prove that. The only basis for this is this: if women of a particular region are more employed, chances of them being lower or nearer to total fertility rate is high. If they are more educated, that is going to be there. Yes, I think because of such a committee report, that Muslims are actually worse placed than even the scheduled caste. Okay, and that's why all those things which affects the reproductive decision rights of a woman is not available there. Okay, so it's not about religion as such. It is about like what kind of independence you have achieved in your family. That allows you to have a say on your reproductive decisions. Okay, that is there. Other thing is completely illogical. That is something which is quite interesting. So if you see Hindu Code Bill when it was brought, there was huge protest. As a matter of fact, Ambedkar had to resign, and Nehru had to invest whole of his political capital in that. It was very tempting because not many of people from Congress also, because Congress at that point of time was an umbrella. The left, right, center, everyone was in Congress. Okay. So at that point of time, Nehru had to invest not much of political capital and call joint session of the parliament to get the Hindu Code Bill passed. So this set of the people who were protesting against making bigamy as offense now are espousing cause of who? Espousing cause of, so who is espousing cause of a Muslim woman? Hindu male. Okay, so who is more worried about Hindu? Muslim women? They're not worried about Hindu women. They're worried about Muslim women. Okay, so that is also something which takes away the agency. That is something where you are speaking for others. In case of pluralism and multiculturalism, you say that you always say you talk about intersectionality. So, for example, not many of Dalit women, they say that women as such have no right to talk about our rights. So every women organization cannot talk about our rights. It has to be Dalit women organization because being women is not enough. Okay, you will not understand our suffering and our situation by just being women. You can understand only if you're having suffering from both kind of families. You are suffering from double family. That is, you are also suffering because of women and you are also suffering because of a Dalit. Then only you will understand that what we require. So that is there. So they say, and now these other people are saying that, oh, Muslims are multiplying because of the fact that they are allowed to have more than one wife. As I said, that has nothing to do. If you go and see migrant labor, some of the Hindus also, more often than not, in village they have one wife, they go there and marry and keep other families. So it has not much to do with, and even if bigamy has been declared as an offense, who has a right to file a complaint. Only the first wife has a right to file the complaint. So it is not something which is a cognizable offense and police can file an offense. So although there is a different issue about Salah Mukul and all this. So coming back to this logic, that's what I'm saying, that not only it is not a good idea, it is illogical. Because you say that they are having more child because of the fact that one man can marry multiple women. Now, anybody having a basic knowledge of science will say that who will bear the child? It's not the man who will bear the child. For bearing child, you require a womb. So the chances of bearing more child is more if there is a monogamous marriage. Because then every woman will be married to one man and then there would be more chance of bearing a child rather than a man marrying 4 women. Okay? So that is illogical. So it is just about economic and social idea, society. It has nothing to do with the religion. And scientifically, it clearly says that wherever people are educated across the religious belief and all this, you'll find. So correspondence in TFR is more about where you are, whether you are economically empowered, whether you are educationally empowered. It has nothing to do with it. So that is an idea. And that is also again something in case of Pakistan, people say that, oh, Pakistani Supreme Court has declared bigamy as an offense. They don't know that there is a Sharia court in Pakistan which decides upon this. That matter is still pending. It is still not decided that whether right. So half-baked knowledge is more problematic. Having no knowledge is better than having. So most of the people who propagate all these kind of ideas have no idea. Yes, I understand that there is one problem with respect to Indian society which we didn't address. That is what South Africa did. That is truth and reconciliation. So India was very tentative after partition. So it wanted to protect this idea that Muslims are not different. Although if you read the citizenship provision, not now, right from the beginning, Muslim has been settled. Right from the beginning when the constitution was done. Go and read the article relating to citizenship, more specifically 7 and 8, you will realize that Muslims were treated different. It was right from the inception. It is not a new. They were called as fifth rate and fifth and all this kind of thing. And that's why if a Muslim wanted to come back to India, they have to go through the process of documentation to get citizenship. If a Hindu wanted to come back from Pakistan, process documentation. So there was a differentiated citizenship right from the beginning. So whosoever thinks that this Citizenship Amendment Act has done something new, it is just following the same logic which has been there right from the beginning. Sometime it appeared that there is a none. But again, after Assam Accord and all this, we again go in that direction. So that is another issue with respect to citizenship. We have become more regressive. Right from the beginning, in between there was the idea that appeared that we are becoming progressive, but after Assam Accord, again we started in that direction. Okay, so so that has been always there. So that is not a new phenomenon. But what I was saying is this, that we went overboard because of partition. We realized Muslim identity in Constituent Assembly was very suspicious. So we'll see that one person actually he subsequently migrated to Pakistan. Initially he remained here. He said that so far as possible, kids should be educated in mother tongue. But see, as an idea that is not problematic, today our new education policy is talking about the same. So you are not engaging with ideas and ideas. Who is speaking and who is talking about that idea matters. And that is what we call as sure-shot recipe for disaster and prejudice. Prejudice is what? You don't see information in isolation, you see information, you tie information in the source of it. That is what advertisers also use for the purpose of advertising. Of course, all those soaps and the deodorants and all this kind of thing, you call it star and you say that. So you tie information with the source of it. Okay, so this person is saying that this is not information. And that is what we call as a sure-shot proposition which will lead to prejudices. Okay? Because you are not assessing information in isolation. And everybody, none other than even Govind Bala once stood in the Constituent Assembly, don't talk about this because of all this identity issue only we had to suffer the parties. Christians were talking about right to conversion. It was looked into with a not much of indulgence. Right to propagate was allowed in the constitution because of Christian idea. It was a very small minuscule minority. But their identity was not to be this. And he wanted to be co-opted. That is another problem. So if you go into most of the Western democracy, what is the idea of a secular state? Which allows religious conversion. For them, that is the only test. That is, if any non-Western society is not allowing religious conversion easily, it is not. So when the Nepalese constitution was getting drafted, Pope was supposed to come, but they defined secularism as ultimately not as per Western society's idea. They modified it in the new constitution, said that the idea of secularism in Nepal would be as followed from Sanatan times, and that led to the situation where Pope decided not to. So what I was saying is this, that you look into it. They said that what was the problem? He was saying that see, market, and that is something which is quite clear. Language being tied to a religion is a new. For most even after independence, if you go and see, if you happen to remain in Delhi, you'll find lot many of people who are Hindus, read old people, read Urdu papers. They're not capable of reading because their language was not tied to an identity. So Hindi was not for Hindus, Urdu was not for the Muslims. It was where you are situated. Okay, what is more prominent language? And you know, as a matter of fact, that this stressing the Arabian origin of Urdu is also a problematic idea and a new fact because Farsi, Arabian language are different from Urdu is a kind of language, and that's why rather than getting used in Hindi, Gandhi always used to use the term Hindustani. So Hindi was kind of Hindustani, okay, rather than getting the term Hindu used. So you're tying that, and new education policy are saying this. So what I'm suggesting is this: the idea per se is not wrong. So there are multiple sides of pluralism, multiculturalism based on language also. And for some time, linguistic states were getting created, and that was one of the reasons because of which you said that the changing of the boundaries of the state would be a flexible line. So you know, as a matter of fact, that amendment to the constitution was debated in the Constituent Assembly. Nehru was of the opinion that amendment should be done in a quite easy manner. Majority of the people were against him. Nehru suggested that at least for the first 10 years, you allow that because we don't know what we are doing is right or wrong. So let us allow the amendment in an easy manner. That was not allowed. So Nehru was defeated on this issue. But on issue of state boundaries, you know, it says clearly that it won't be treated as an amendment for the purpose. So linguistic identities were clearly obvious. They were clear. They were trying to discourage this because the fact that you realize that there are lot of facing worse tendencies, so let us not encourage it as whether religious identities or a linguistic identity, let us not encourage it. But you're quite clear. And you know, as a matter of fact, in 1956 itself, the State Reorganization Commission was established, and all reorganization which happened on the basis of linguistic identity, no other identity. So over a period of time, India realized to become more comfortable with linguistic. Although today, as I said, I was saying that 41% of Indian population speaks Hindi. And there are 5 more major languages, but more than 5 Bengali being second. Urdu is also being spoken by more than 5%. But linguistic ideas somehow found some kind of peace in linguistic ideas. Over a period of time, people realize that it's okay. Still, it is simmering somewhere, but it's much local in effect. Like say, some part of Northeast like Assam and all this, where some linguistic identity matters. You know that Bengali speaking people are suspicious and all this kind of thing. So, except for certain pockets, linguistic identity by and large has been settled. But this was also one of the identity which was good. So, what we are suggesting is this: that in case of India, multiculturalism was cross-sectional multiculturalism. So that's why it started with Ashish Nadi's say. So we suppose you are a Hindu. Within Hindu, you are maybe a caste Hindu, or you come to a section which falls lower in the hierarchy. Then there are multiple regional identities, okay, and then there are linguistic identities. So this idea of construction of majority was very difficult because on many issues, and for that matter, in spite of tribals being more than 7% of the population at that point of time, at this point of time, they are nearly 8.6%. Their ideas were not much looked at. So, Jaipal Singh Munda, who was extraordinary hockey player, you know that he was captain of the English board, was a very good orator. He was initially co-opted by missionaries, sponsored his study to Oxford. But after coming back, he denounced Christianity and came back to Islam. So he said on the floor of the Constituent Assembly that when the Constitution was last adopted in the name of so many things, and everybody said that it is in the name of Bapu and all this thing, everybody clapped. He said that, but where are my? And it's not that he was not it. So you know, as a matter of fact, that in spite of Gandhi's influence of going against intoxication, it was not put as a kind of clearly prohibited norms under any other specific provision because of influence of Jaipal Singh Munda only, because he said that us tribal, we use in all pious occasions, we use liquor. We offer liquor to our God. We consume liquor as a part and parcel of ceremony. So it was the influence of Jaipal Singh Munda which led to this idea. So there's so many things which are interesting issues of intersectionality and multiculturalism which you don't realize. So that was not because, so you just see that Gandhi, in spite of being so influential, his idea was not accepted in the Constituent Assembly because of intervention of Jaipal Singh Munda. He said that if you declare consumption of liquor as illegal, most of our rituals will become illegal because we generally more often than not use liquor in our rituals. So this was also good people. So a particular aspect of tribal identity, not the tribal identity as a self-majority idea that where you are going to lead with, particular idea. of course, that is a sad story that so many other things were not talked about, despite of the fact that they formed a significant kind of a significant part of. So, in spite of all this, that we were tentative that that is there. For example, even if you look for the most privileged class, okay, that is upper caste. So if you look into for the numbers, 16% as per the census. So by that explanation, thereby 16% of population is not majority. Hindus are in minority in many places in India. So what is majority and minority is not an European idea, which would be applicable across the spectrum in India. It is a very complex idea. Not necessarily, and then what kind of power? So you know that there are religious powers, there are political powers. So not necessarily just because of the fact that you are higher in caste hierarchy, you are politically also powerful. So intermediate castes are by basically that. So that's why there was not much of opposition against this reservation to OBCs. Because even if in caste hierarchy they fall lower, but they were not socially excluded in the manner as scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, and they are not devoid of political power either. There are many places, for example, when you talk about Jats in Haryana and certain part of Rajasthan, in Haryana it is still debated issue, but in Rajasthan they're politically powerful community. So there also, even if you fall lower in the caste hierarchy, not necessarily, maybe for certain ritualistic purposes, you are lower in hierarchy, but for all other purposes, maybe for political purposes and all this kind of thing, you know, you are higher in hierarchy. Okay, so that is again the idea which has to be looked into. That what kind of empowerment you are looking for, whether it is an empowerment in general to take care of their dignity, or it is something else. So whenever you're trying to go for affirmative action, it was not again something like affirmative action which US is following. That is just based on race and nothing else. Okay, black and white. In India, it is grey. There are multiple shades of grey, not only one shade. There are multiple shades of the grey where we'll find that various people will suffer. And that's why Sudhir Thorat actually writes in his book on untouchability. That is why the system of caste hierarchy is so acceptable to Indian society. Because of the fact that except for the lowest and except for the highest, everybody is either higher and lower than someone else. And that's why you remain invested in the whole process. Because you don't see much harm in being there. Because you may be lower than some other, but you may be higher than others. So some interests of yours are also protected. So that's why it is a complex society. It is not one kind of unified legal-based society. No, if you are Christian, then you are this, you are Muslim, you are this, and that is what European society is all about. Even if you are Hindus, in certain areas you'll find certain things. And for that matter, who is an untouchable is different. For example, Gandhi coming from, now, you know his community, where Home Minister famously said once, Gandhi was a Chaturban. So Gandhi, although he was treated and is treated as an upper caste in Gujarat, but in lot many of southern states, he was treated as a lower caste. In his site, and he records that he visited some of the temples in southern state, and within his site, when he was leaving that place, he was first not allowed entry to the sanctum sanctorum. He was told to sit at the door and talk to the priest. And within his site, when he was leaving the place, the purification process started. So that is also complex. Except for one and two community at the highest level who would be treated as upper caste everywhere. For most of the intermediate caste, who is untouchable, who is OBC, who is open category candidate, and all this is also complex. It is not uniform across the country. So intersectionality and multiculturalism in Indian context becomes much more complex. So, as I was saying that with respect to Muslim identity, one, they were suspicious because of this idea that this identity actually has resulted into a movement, which resulted into partition and all this, although that's too simplistic explanation to go for because it's much complex. Because from 1920s onward, when you started thinking on the lines of that there would be no representational idea with respect to electorate and all this, so you started talking against all this idea that representative electorates, you created a suspicion that if you are not in majority, then so it allowed for a fertile ground for Jinnah to actually explode. And Jinnah was a later cut. So when for the first time in Oxford, Rahmat Ali, when he coined the idea of Pakistan, Jinnah said that not you. That of course it was a political decision also. But it is not simplistic idea that Muslim as an identity and all this kind of thing which created all this kind of problem. proportional representation in principle, how it is bad, because most of the progressive European states are going for that. So you go for C and German situation. If you have a particular number of vote backing in your totality of electorate, even if you don't win any seat, so you know in Germany they have the very complex system of representation, sometimes so direct election. So if you get a threshold pass, you necessarily get a representation in their Bundestag. So you get their representation. That is, you will get. So are you saying that Germany is a less liberal society because of this and all this? So most of the things are more complex. But as I said, that one of the things which was problematic, which I think has led to so many of narrative which gets traction that Muslims have been privileged and all this kind of thing, but none of the facts are this. But why it is getting traction? Because of the simple reason that we didn't go for something called truth and reconciliation. So you started spreading a narrative that no, Muslims never committed any kind of atrocities. Maybe those Muslims who were there from 7th century onwards and originally before the invasion of people, Muslims coming from other side, they may not be problematic. But of course, they have exploited people and they have harmed people, they have tortured people. So that is what South Africa did. South Africa said that, okay, since we are supposed to live together, so what we'll have to do, we'll have to say that truth and reconciliation. Let us first speak about what is truth. That is, yes, whites have done something that is nasty. But since we are supposed to live together, so let us follow. Okay. Sri Lanka also tried to do that after Jaffna crisis, but in Sri Lanka it has not been so successful. So that has not happened. And that's why some kind of what we call as collective consciousness goes contrary to what state is trying to do. So because in family you can find that just because of the fact you are Hindus, there were atrocities committed by some Muslim rulers against you. So if you deny that, then it will run contrary to the fact. That's what I was saying earlier, that description of a society is required and empirically it should be justifiable. It cannot be a top-down kind of idea where you say that nothing happened. But yes, after that you'll have to say that as South Africa did, that since whites are ultimately, they don't have anything to go back to. They cannot go back to say United States of America or any European country. All said and done, now they're South Africa. Okay, and that's why they will have to live. They're as South African as a black star. So same thing has not happened in India, which has created a fertile ground for the purposes of so many things. The state very consciously started creating a counter narrative where, while for the purposes of creating this, so that is what I was saying. That it was a complex society, and you'll have to recognize that. It has multiple anchoring at multiple sites. Same person will fall in advantage category if you look if you like criteria of classification is something else, and will become a disadvantage category if the criteria of classification is something else. Okay, so that is something which has been always there in Indian society. Unlike say United States of America, by its very nature, black has to be a slave. By its very nature, white has to be a person who is a property class. That was not the situation in case of. There are so many people among the upper class Hindu also. They may not be having any economic power. So they may feel disadvantaged if you are looking for economic here. So that project created some other problem. So you wanted to go for deep multiculturalism, but at the same time, you didn't realize the multiple sides of pluralism in India, which created the possibility of people feeling left out, their identity not getting accounted for, and that actually leads to a faulty state policy making. And that creates a problem with respect to effectiveness or efficacy of policy. So I can go on, but since only views will disagree with me.
Yes.
Anything from the last section also?
So in the last lecture, you made a passing reference about public-private distinction. So my question is from that understanding, sir, is there a diminishing public-private distinction with respect to state intervention in religion, and whether this diminishing distinction, is it going to be a threat to legal pluralism as well as in general pluralism in India?
So in the last class, I know I recall that we could not answer the one part of your question. That is, he also asked about this job ban and all these things. That is also related. So this market that I would say I've been saying today also I try to emphasize that, and I also gave an example of Article 14 issue equality, formal equality and subject. So when you say that religious symbols are bad, it's not really true. Why? Because of the fact that certain religious symbols by its very nature are non-conspicuous, and certain religious symbols are conspicuous. So when Christian, you're supposed to wear a cross, you can just tuck it in your clothes, nobody will see that you're wearing it. But most of its part, Hindus can also do that, unless until you wear some chandan or something. But most of the religious symbols of Hindu also you can just wear it in a non-conspicuous, unless until you're a woman and you're supposed to see that. Or Madras, then remove your cover so that.
That's very out of context quoted. Categorically, the quoted that is not a ground.
But that's what I'm saying. That signaling is what. What so why judiciary is important? So one is that is what Baxi has developed that in the form of demo students. So that is not his original idea. There's the idea of union and where he talks about, and then he talks about the impact of oral observations of them. He has written a paper in Harvard. Where he talks about that how oral observations and oral dissents are important for the purpose of understanding film. Very good. So there, and I said that Baxi tried to develop in an Indian context. So these are very important. You go for signaling. So why you know about Bhagavati and Krishna are both? Because of the fact that they decided that as a court we should be addressing people directly. Not only through what we write in judgments and what goes into the reporters, which many people won't read. But that is what the signaling is doing. So coming back to the original. So if you think that what we are doing, we are applying it across this. So we are not saying that Hindus are exempted or Christians are exempted, everybody. You're not supposed to wear it, please. So just think that in Karnataka, what happened? People have to, Hindus who are protesting have to reinvent something which is not core of their identity. Some kind of Ram Nami Chadar or something, home or something inscribed, they started wearing, which is not an actual dress, which except for unless until you are a saint. If you're a saint in some kind of monastery, then you wear that. The common Hindu doesn't wear that. Okay? So under those circumstances, so when France says that, and in France, they have given a very interesting justification for this. They said that when you wear hijab, it defeats the social solidarity. So this idea of French nationality. So this idea of French Revolution is very complex. It was not a liberal movement, and that's why if you read Barton Russell, he criticizes French Revolution a lot, saying that it was not a good. So as a matter of fact, that today we think that French people speak French and French identity is there. French identity was a minority identity. Not majority of the people who are not speaking French in France. As you talk about French identity today, it was not a French identity at that point of time, it was a country. And if you are not following those kind of identity, you will be put to was under a lot of pressure. That's why I always said that uniformity. So if you go by basic science law. In science there is a concept called entropy. Left to itself, things would be in disarray, variance and openness. Only after application of pressure, there is a symmetry which is achieved. So whenever you find uniformity and all this, there is a great chance that there is a top-down pressure. By its very nature, human beings are supposed to be different. Human beings are supposed to behave differently. Okay, and that is what the human existence is all about. That is what universe is all about. So this French monolithic identity was created. So that's why it is also important to understand that when they talk about solidarity or this idea of separatism. So when they say that separatism in France is not the same understanding as we understand, say, maybe in common parties. That is working in state and all this kind of thing. Separatism is you are going against the French identity. It's not about religion and such. So that's where France becomes it. But coming back to justification, they said that okay, it affects French solidarity because there is no eye-to-eye contact. Okay, because if you are wearing hijab, there is no eye-to-eye contact, and it makes people suspicious and it affects the social sort. If you look into sexual harassment laws, it says that if you scare a person, it's sexual harassment. So how long you want to look into the eyes of the people for establishment of social solidarity? I don't know. So whether it should be stare, I don't think that unless until we're talking at this point of time that we, by its very nature, will establish eye contact. Most of the people are not very comfortable with prolonged eye contact. That if we start becoming uncomfortable, if a stranger goes for a prolonged eye contact, there is not much of psychological. That European Court of Human Rights also try to just short circuit the process and squeeze itself out from all this. So they said that there is something called margin of appreciation. They said that we'll give margin of appreciation to them to decide that. In one of the judgment, they have decided that. So these are all illogical ideas on the basis of which all these kind of things. And then the same idea. And what I was saying, that is upper caste women talking about Dalit women or Hindu maid talking about Muslim. You don't know how to actually decide with certainty what. And more often than not, it takes away the. So let us assume that most of Muslim women are uncomfortable with pilgrimage. So it is all, if they are uncomfortable and there is no room, it is not problem. But let us assume that there are 2% of the Muslim women who thinks that my Muslim identity requires me to wear hijab. You take away their agency. So it is not a neutral law as such, it is an intrusive. And it won't be justified on the basis of anything like, say, untouchability or something like that, which is clearly an issue of dignity, human dignity. Particular attire and all this may not to a certain extent be an issue of human dignity. That is other. If you come to Indian context like Shaira Banu case was little bit more nuanced. Not many of law people don't know that triple talaq has not been declared as a constitutional. Instead, triple talaq has been declared. It is the legislation which has actually criminalized the. Now, how it is supposed to be looked into from the idea of asking for. Because suppose somebody, what it is, as a matter of fact, it is an illegal divorce or an illegal divorce. If somebody gives an illegal divorce or go for an illegal separation with their wife and not a Muslim, are there any criminal consequences for that? And where you are on one hand, you are saying and protecting the autonomy of the people by saying that adultery should not be a criminal offense because it is a consensual sexual activity. If it does anything, it does destroy the good faith between husband and wife. So it can be a ground for divorce, but it should not be a ground for criminal acts. And on the other hand, a divorce, you are saying, should be a ground for criminal acts. So what it will result in? One, you won't be able to take care of this if you consider it as an evil in society. Because not many women will not be still comfortable with this idea that I'll send my husband to the jail. Because they're a societal person. You say that even if you're not, if he's not treating you well and not physically harming you, then you separate and go your own ways. But where is the point in sending that person to the jail? I can understand that if some domestic violence has been committed and all this thing, there is a reason on the basis of which the person should. So what will happen? And even if it is illegal, less of the reporting. Secondly, except for police, nobody else will become part of it. Police would be quite happy because they always look for something. You must have just seen during initial waves of corona how enlightened and enthralled police were that they can just start beating anyone. Whoever is found on the road can be beaten down. That is the kind of empowerment. In India, empowerment doesn't come from knowledge or anything. It comes from.
But then another,
So that is illogical, not consistent with the general jurisprudence, and will not serve the purpose which you intend to. Okay? Because you know, as a matter of fact, that for taking care of ordinary social evils, criminalization. So worldwide, we are going for decriminalization of most of the human activities. Okay? Whether it was consensual homosexuality, adultery, or all this kind of thing. But at some point of time, you're saying that in certain cases we'll make civil act. This is a civil act, a criminal offense. So primarily, it is another. based on any other understanding, unless and until the state has its own logic. State has some knowledge which, irrespective of state, so there I don't distinguish. So that is another problem. That when we criticize state, we become quite episodical. It should be structural. Indian state has been like that kind of thing. Yoga is not the creation of Linga. You go and see and read Dr. Darman Singh book, first 16 days, first amendment story. He will tell you that all those things which are alleged against the present government were alleged against Nehru himself. So Malvinkar wrote to the Speaker of the Lok Sabha, wrote to Nehru that it's not good that you're bypassing Lok Sabha. So whatever you find that the people have short memory, and that there is the place. That is it. That's everything. Taking the time.
I have a question. It's not a question actually. Certain practices per se are relative of the sense and asserting for women particularly. We look at the concept of halala, and for that matter, if we talk about triple talaq also, we see that in Faizi's book, which is then revised by Tahir Hussain, he states that triple talaq was not an accepted norm. It just happened that when women approached from Egypt saying that these men said that we have procured an instant talaq, and on that ground we have married them. So he said, to protect your marriage, I legalized triple talaq, but it was not accepted. Don't you see that sometimes it's very difficult for a class or a community who's being exploited to get up and fight against it? It requires a person, an outsider, who can get up and challenge it. So if Muslim women don't get up and challenge halala or don't challenge triple talaq, how do you, anticipate that change happens? Even if a high class Hindu is thinking of Muslim women, what's wrong in that? That's called empathy. Empathizing is not a bad thing to do, I think.
Empathy requires that you actually step in the shoes of the people.
Yes, absolutely. But you don't.
Coming back to the other issues,
Right.
I will not go in the first part because I would be more than happy because I teach Islamic legal system in my comparative. So the first part is very complex. It is not so simple, and that's why Supreme Court also will not come to any conclusion. What Prophet Muhammad did, so that is what Abdul al-Alahi al-Naim looks like. One of the famous Islamic scholars at Harvard, and Rawls have been a great fan of the Rawls also quite extensively, and he writes about Abdul Alahi al-Naim in political debates. And Rawls is a person who is a liberal, actually is a kind of touchstone of liberalism. Rawls was a response to utilitarianism, and idea created idea. In political liberalism, he talks. So Prophet Muhammad, it says that should be understood in two ways: Makkah period and Madinah period. One was a war period, another was a more peaceful period. So one is a general teaching of Islam, other is a contextual teaching. So there is no problem there. My issue is, at no point of time I said that instant triple talaq should not be abolished. If I convert that, let me say it clearly. I never said. What I said was this: criminalization of that activity is important in the light of. So you become what and I gave my reason because of which it would be counterproductive rather than productive. Thirdly, because of intersectionality, so social reforms are never achieved through law. We talked about that, except for extraordinary circumstances. Untouchability is a classic example. If that can be achieved through law, Constitution itself, forget about what this is. It is nowhere in comparison to untouchability. Constitution itself has created an offense. Untouchability in any form is abolished, and practice of its in any form is declared as an offense by Constitution itself. Have you been able to remove untouchability? So that is what a student of multicultural and pluralism is supposed to know. You don't deploy a sledgehammer to for a purpose where a knife will do the job. Because it will be destructive of so many other things, and it will be counterproductive. That has been my limited submission. At no point of time, that's why I have been saying right from the beginning. I don't think you were there at that point of time, and that's why you must have missed. I said that why we went for weak multiculturalism, because we wanted to reform things. So state can reform not only by criminalizing activities. Criminalization of activity is not a progressive way to do the reforms across the world. It has been accepted. That is, reforms, social reforms are not done through criminalization. It is done through sensitization, it is done through creation of all those kind of things, and that is required. And that's why you find that social reform movements are more successful than law. And that is what law must recognize. That is what the Nobel laureate of economics who has written the book Nudge with a professor of law, Kassenstein, Richard Thaler. He says that state must nudge to change the behavior. So he's a professor of behavioral economics, Richard Thaler, got Nobel Prize, but the book Nudge has been written along with Kassenstein, who's a professor of law at Yale. So they say that policy changes, a state with respect to change for the purpose of inculcating change in the behavior should go for an approach of nudge. Nudge achieves much more than what all this kind of thing is. So you should tell people that what is the right thing to do and encourage them to go in that direction. There are so many things to be done. But if you criminalize, what happens? You will again overburden the state legal system. You know, as a matter of fact, that how many people are under trial for languishing in the jail, and there will be not much of disincentive against the women to actually go there, because societal pressure is still there. Even if people are with women on this issue that we should go and separate, they may not be on this issue that just because he decided not to be with you. But domestic violence is an offense because it is a violence. It is a violence. Okay, so there's no problem on that. That a Muslim man can very well can do something which can qualify as domestic violence or an offense under IBC. I'm not saying that just because he's a Muslim man, he should be not subjected to that. But why a Hindu man who, because of cruelty, indulges into divorce and all this kind of thing, should be not subjected to criminal prosecution? A Muslim should be. So if a Muslim was there, everybody is anchored in the society. It is not that you are divided from the society. So what kind of pressure that woman has to bear? That unnecessarily this person is languishing in the jail. What he has done to you? You don't want to pay with him. So what else? That declaring this right, that what he said that I divorce you, that has been done. You have a right to continue. On one hand, you're saying restitution of conjugal right is bad. On the other hand, you're saying that no, even if he doesn't want to be with you, you compel that person to be with you. So either you hunt with hare and or run with hound. You cannot hunt with hound and run with hare. You cannot run with hare and hunt with hound. So what are you looking for? Theoretical consistency in what he did. At no point of time I'm saying that I actually acknowledge that and I accept that that is what Indian state was all about. And so the state will not interfere. How will you go for double entry movements and all this? But to what extent he can go? How many activities have been criminalized? So that is my. And if this activity is getting criminalized, all similar activities must get. Otherwise, by an opinion, I don't find a rational theoretical consistency in doing that. There's no problem if you say that it is not a divorce. That is okay. You say that this divorce is void. So okay. Because at that point of time, many other things which should be there and it's social evil which you want to take care of. So we'll say that you cannot divorce me in an instant. Even if you want to follow it, some kind of gap must be there between you pronounce talaq 3 times. So that's what I said, that triple talaq is not illegal. Only thing which is illegal is instant. Yeah.
And it should have been a civil offense. Should have not been criminal.
I said that. So these are the things where you're going over. And that's when these are the things which have become. So there is a family in India which returns more member of parliament than many small political parties. Mr. Dharmendra. He himself and his son both are having 2 wives. And they are member of the party. Both of them are Hindus. Although Dharmendra has officially converted to Islam, but as per Salah Muslim, that conversion is bad. Okay? Lily Thomas is Salah Muslim, so he is supposed to be Hindu. That judgment is again problematic because what you have decided that this social evil I want to correct. So what you have done? You won't be Hindu for bigamy, but for Muslim for conversion. So you're neither here nor there. An individual for one part of his existence is Muslim. For other part of existence, he continues to be. And what is happening? Nothing is happening. We have never. There is another famous from classical dance, Mr. Raja. He performed his two of his wives publicly. He knows, everybody knows that. So that's what I'm saying. That like I mean, Hindu is more prevalent than Muslims. This is a recorded empirical fact. So what you have been able to achieve? Nothing. Yes, most of the people. What? Although this would be a nasty statement, but I was one of the Muslim, and somebody asked him that they've been given the privilege to marry for women. Muslim said that whether having 4 wives is a privilege. This is what actually. So you go and read Mukul Keshav's book, A Secular Common Sense. So he went there and interviewed a person. He said that why Muslims should be getting the privilege of having 4 wives and we don't have. So are you against this evil, or you're thinking that mujhe nahi mil raha isliye kharab? What you are looking for? So they say that it's a privilege given to Muslims. If you think it is bad, it should not be done. So you should not say it is a privilege. So it is kind of second fraud of Hindu male against Muslim male. Nothing else. But as a matter of fact, as I said, it's all about economic and educational. As is the case with the productive outcomes. More educated people are, more economically empowered they are, lesser are the chances of having multiple. So there are ways in which you can do that. So Turkey has done it in a very interesting manner. So that's why many people don't understand that everybody will quote a newspaper. We read everything through newspapers. You read newspaper for sports. You don't read newspaper for understanding. For that, you read books. So newspapers have Turkey and all this kind of table. They also have what is Muslim country and all this. Turkey says that what is the law? They say that Islam says that you can marry, have more than 1 wife with a clause that you are supposed to treat them equally. So they say that since it is impossible for a human to love and treat all individuals equally, so that's why it is against Islam. So it's better when you reform the Islam. Rather than saying that, no, even Islam says this, you cannot marry. Then a person every person is not a person who is looking into multiculturalism, pluralism, or secular ideas. So it is same. Indian Supreme Court says that why Hindu goes to temple for moksha. But most of the Hindu goes to temple for having small things. A small job, good marks in examination, all this kind of thing. How many Hindus go to temple for moksha? So he says that, no, if you don't go to temple for moksha, you are not a Hindu. So that is again a problematic idea. What you ended up doing, you have a Hindu, you converted Hinduism into Christianity, monolithic religion. That was the folly just committed by Mr. Vivekananda, Vedanta and all this. So what they were looking for, they were trying to understand Hinduism through the lens of Christianity. Hinduism at its very nature as said was plural. And that's why we say that when we say 300 million god and goddesses, it was because of not that because of the fact that you would have to have a private gods. Everybody was allowed to worship and have their own god. And that was the beauty. And then what you ended up doing, you converted Hinduism into a Brahmic religion, one god. And then when Supreme Court started looking into that, is again violation of the basic tenet of Stuart Mill and law. Because Mill doesn't say only this. Mill clearly says that interpretation of religion by civil magistrate is as violative of secularism as interfere in secular affairs like church. It's not only criticizing church, it's criticizing judiciary also and state also. That civil judiciary has no role to play in interpretation of religious affairs. But what happened? Initial certain judges of Indian Supreme Court were coming from some dharmic families. There were some dharma shastris also, like Gajendra Garkar, Mukherjee and all this. They have written on Hindu dharma. We know Hindu dharma. So you may have no Hindu dharma, but here you are a judge. You are a secular judge. So they ended up going looking for what is the core of Hindu religion. What is the core of Hindu religion? So they could not come to anything except for moksha. They say that except for moksha, nothing else is essential feature of Hindu. So whatever you do as an Hindu is not what you are supposed to do with it. Unless until you go and pray to God for moksha. Then only you are doing what Hindu is supposed to do, as per Supreme. That is what you do. You do violence to religion also. That is what Mill was saying. We always do one part of secularism. That is, state is not supposed to, religion is not supposed to interfere in the affairs of the state. Secularism is also about state not interfering in religion. Mill clearly says that. other thing.
Any other question?
So I don't say that you agree with me, but the whole idea is this, that I have given you some kind of.
Like observation thing, my class में देखी थी. Those people who used to seriously attack on the Bhungat Pratha, you should defend hijab on the basis of intersectionality. मैं कभी समझ नहीं पाया वो logic ऐसे अलग.
That's what I'm saying, that don't look for logic from individual behaviors. Look for logic from a consistent theoretical process. That if I think something is evil, it is evil across that platform. If something is not evil, it is evil, it is not evil for others. That's what I said. That you cannot run with hair and hunt with hound. Just कुछ चीजों में तो आप यहाँ रहेंगे, कुछ चीजों में आप वहाँ रहेंगे. Indian Hindu law actually gives privilege to Pardadashi women. Their contracts are void. They don't understand. So that is another problem. We tend to conflate literacy with education. Easy person can get a perfect food.
I think, sir, most of the stripes are related to culture. And culture, as Jiddu Krismurti said, is just like an image which is nurtured through conditioning since childhood. So most of the similarities of human being are neglected for the sake of plurality and differences. And that's why all kinds of stripes are happening in society.
Yeah, so as we always say that we have moved away from this idea of melting pot to tossed salad. Because melting pot was one. So because melting pot was all about uniformity. At the end of the day, you want everyone to be uniform. Whereas the tossed salad actually says that you're together and still you can have distinct identity, and it will have a perfectly useful thing to do. So that is the way you understand multiculturalism because melting pot will at the end of the day will have a predominant flavor. It will have one flavor. The product will be one to be identified as. That is not what multiculturalism is. So again, also people who believe in majoritism, as they move out of their country, they just become weak. Say that our identity is important. So you go to America, all Hindus will have their own temples, will pray and follow all those kind of rituals which they must have forgotten here in India. I have American friends actually keep on sending wishes with respect to some festival I have forgotten. And it's like because of the fact that they send wishes. So that is the human nature. When you are at place. So even if you go in India, you'll see if you're in a village, you will along caste lines. If you go outside your village, you look for a villager. You go out of a district, you look for your state, and then once you go out of the country, look for other identities. So it's all about a kind of this identities actually gives you a meaning for conducting your life. Nothing else. Otherwise, it would be quite difficult to actually make sense of what you're doing. So that's what is a kind of psychological protection. All of the things you do, you respect your protection. So if you're software engineer, it doesn't matter that whether you're Hindu, Muslim, or whatever religion you do. But for the purpose of doing what you're supposed to do, you should be secure about your identity, that I won't be subjected to some prejudices or some negative consequences because of something else, except for my qualification, what I'm supposed to do. And that is what all this protection of identity does. State says that doesn't matter. Till the time you don't create a law and order issue, which affects the civil peace of the country. What you do in your private sphere is none of our. So that is what it does. And that is all about what peaceful creation. And so all of pluralism, multiculturalism ideas about tolerance, peace, and all this kind of. So it is all about that larger. It is not that words against the prospects. More of the problems are actually more of the conflicts. Yes, that's it. I'm defender of it. There are certain things, but for those purposes, you don't have to create uniform civil codes. You just pluck out certain things from there. So do take care of all that. Why you should be having a uniform practice with respect to how people marry, how they divorce, and all this kind of thing? What purpose it is? More of them thought it would be more observability than observance. More observability than observance. If you do something which doesn't make sense, will take us to basic idea of heart. I hope that some of you will keep on reading and hope that you will also find some weaknesses in my argument.
अपनी email ID पता. Okay.
That's simple. I write Neeraj with an I. Neeraj Kumar. I am very lethargic in looking at him, so if I don't reply, it is not because I have some arrogance. Yes, you must have. When I go to the details of my vice chancellor, then he goes, I send you a mail, you know. If I don't reply, just send me. Not that I want to ignore, that's why I. This is almost impossible. Better things to read. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for